because it makes a little more sense. How did I get Sentient Trader to produce this analysis? In fact, it was really, really easy. All I had to do was define a different analysis start period. You will know from Trader Chat previously, and from you'll know as an ongoing theme when working with Sentient Trader, that what the most important thing you need to do is tell Sentient Trader how much data to analyze. So by simply telling Sentient Trader to start its analysis somewhere over here in early 2004, Sentient Trader, by default, I haven't applied any expert models or special settings or anything. All I've done is I've told it to ignore everything that happened before March 2004. Or January, I think that might be January 2004. At any rate, by getting Sentient Trader to ignore that, it's produced a slightly different analysis. I say slightly different because, in fact, if you look in detail at this analysis, the only difference actually is the positioning of the 4.5 year cycle, which it has positioned here in March of 2009, and it's positioned another one there in July of 2004. Now, the purists amongst you, and Hurst purists, would say, but that's no good. You can't be positioning 4.5 year cycle trough in 2004, because if you zoom out a little bit on that chart, which I will do, then clearly the positioning of a 4.5 year cycle trough here is absolute nonsense. Okay, what about that big trough that happened before it in 2002 and 2003? Although I tend to be a Hurst purist myself, when speaking about analysis in theoretical terms, when it comes to performing trading, I'm not a Hurst purist at all. And what's most important when you're performing trading is that the analysis that is providing you with information today, in other words, right at the end of the chart, what I call the right-hand edge of the chart, what's most important is that the analysis now is accurate. The positioning of a trough back in 2004 or 2003 or 2002 has very little impact when you're performing trading today. What's most important is that you get a good picture emerging for the most recent time period. Okay, that's what I believe. So yes, as a Hurst purist, I would agree this positioning of the trough in 2004 is probably complete nonsense. But what's more important is that the analysis ever since early 2009 is looking very good and is looking very useful for us to make trading decisions. So that's really important for me. I'm not a Hurst purist when it comes to trading. When it comes to trading, make sure that your analysis is looking good now. Okay, so let's zoom in and see what that analysis is saying. Okay, here we're still looking at a weekly weekly chart. In other words, each one of these bars represents 1 week of trading information. And you can see that according to this analysis that I'm about to start making some trading decisions upon, according to this analysis, there was a 4.5 year cycle trough in March of 2009. And again, we could have a long debate about that. I know many people would say no, they don't believe that's true. I happen to believe it might be a trough of the 6 year cycle, but I'm not going to get complicated. For now, we're going to accept that. Yes, it looks like a prominent trough. That's great. We're going to accept that that was a trough of the 4.5 year cycle. What has happened since then? Well, what has happened since then is that there have been two 18-month cycles that have played out. The first 18-month cycle troughed in July of 2010. And in fact, if you go back and look at our forum from July of 2010, you will notice that one of our very experienced users of Sentient Trader, Silent One, posted in July of 2010, posted his comments about the S&P 500, stating that he believed that the trough of the 18-month cycle had come in early July 2010, which proved to be a remarkably accurate forecast. Here we are, almost 2 years later, and that trough is still recognized generally as being a trough of the 18-month cycle. What happened then was there was another trough of the another cycle of the 18-month cycle, which troughed on the 4th of October 2011, last year. Okay, those both look like good cycle shapes. You know, they make sense to me. You can see the clear M shapes there for those cycles. Those cycle shapes are looking good. I feel fairly good about this analysis. There are a few questions that we need to raise, which have to do with the price action since that trough in October of 2011. So let's zoom in and have a look at what's happened since then. Just sticking with the long-term view for a moment, what's expected next? Well, of course, there are 3 18-month sub-cycles to every 54-month cycle. So you can see I've left my semicircles on. The 54-month or 4.5-year cycle is busy heading down towards a trough, which is expected towards well, sometime in 2013 probably. And we've had 2 18-month sub-cycles, in other words, cycles that are subdivisions of the longer 54-month cycle. And there is, of course, 1 18-month cycle left to carry us down to that major 54-month cycle low. Okay, so that's the bigger picture. That's what's happening at the moment. Let's zoom in a little more and let's change that. Change the chart to daily bars so that we can see a little more detail in terms of what's happened. Okay, let's have a look at the most recent 18-month cycle as it has unfolded. Now you'll know, if you've been taking a look at our ST outlooks, our market commentaries that we post every weekend, that I believe that there was a trough of the 20-week cycle in early March of this year. And so there is the first 20-week cycle, and now we're expecting another 20-week cycle to unfold, and that 20-week cycle will have a trough which will be synchronous with the first 40-week cycle trough in the current 18-month cycle. Now, I'm sorry if sometimes this discussion involves lots of numbers and months and weeks and things like that. It's very important when you're dealing with Hurst cyclic principles that you understand that although you're going to be trading one cycle, you must have an understanding of all the cycles that are at play in the market. That is of absolute fundamental importance, and that is what makes trading using Hurst cyclic principles so fascinating, and that is what that is also what makes it such a challenge. You have to keep in your mind a picture, if you like, of where all these cycles are and what they're all doing. Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how you can do that. Okay, as you become used to working as a Sentient Trader, you will be able to see, I would say at a glance, where all the cycles are and what's happening. But for somebody who's new to her cyclic principles, it can be a bit of a challenge. But you must stick with it, and because the rewards are huge once you have a true understanding of what's happening in all the cycles that are affecting the market. Okay, so the most recent trough of the 18-month cycle occurred in October of last year, which means that cycle is expected, of course, to go up and then come down again and form another trough in 18 months' time. Okay, within that 18-month cycle, there will be 2 40-week cycles. The first 40-week cycle is expected to go up and come down and form a trough sometime summer this year for the Northern Hemisphere. And you can see the circle and whiskers indicates the exact time where that cycle is expected to make a trough. Within that 40-week cycle, there are 2 20-week cycles, and I've already drawn them there. And so the first 20-week cycle, according to this analysis, started, of course, on the 4th of October and played out until the 6th of March. Okay, so we're now in the second 20-week cycle. Okay. What it's useful to do is start measuring these cycles. Let's see how much time passed. How long was that first 20-week cycle? You can measure by pressing the control button and clicking with your mouse. You can see that first 20-week cycle was 22 weeks. So it was a slightly long 20-week cycle. And since then, about 36 days have passed. How can you count the bars from a trough? It's very simple. You right-click and you count the bars. There we go. So that's counting the bars from that most recent 20-week trough. Okay, so assuming that this is correct, and I think there's every reason that it could be correct, what are we going to do in terms of trading? Okay, well, the first thing you need to decide when you're going to start trading using Hurst cyclic principles is you need to decide what cycle am I going to trade. Although Hurst cyclic principles state that an infinite number of cycles affect the price movements of financial markets, you need to choose one to trade. And you need to stick with that cycle while you're trading it. Okay, once you've exited the trade, of course, you can change your mind and start trading a different cycle. Now, I'm working with an end-of-day version of Sentient Trader, so trading an intraday cycle is obviously out of the question. I have only end-of-day data. What cycles could I possibly trade using the end-of-day version of Sentient Trader? Well, I could, in theory, trade any cycle from 5 days all the way up to 4.5 years. I would certainly not want to trade the 5-day cycle. Why is that? Because the 5-day cycle is the shortest cycle that Sentient Trader has in its analysis. And so the finer details about what's happening with that 5-day cycle aren't available to you with this resolution of data. So the 5-day cycle is out of the question. Personally, I believe the 10-day cycle is also out of the question, although you could argue that you could trade the 10-day cycle. However, I think the shortest cycle that you could realistically trade with end-of-day data using Hurst cyclic principles is the 20-day cycle. Personally, I prefer to trade the 40-day cycle. Now, why is that? Well, when you're choosing the cycle to trade, the first thing you need to ask yourself is how often do you want to be trading and making trading decisions? If you're trading using end-of-day data, then you must monitor your trades every day. There is very little question about that, unless you're trading a very long cycle, such as a 4.5-year or an 18-month cycle, in which case you could make trading decisions once a week, or potentially even once a month. But seeing as you're working with end-of-day data, I would recommend you make your trading decisions and you monitor your trades every single day. The next thing to consider, of course, when you're choosing a trading cycle, is how often are you going to be trading? Using Hurst cyclic principles, you will have 2 trading opportunities per cycle. Okay, a long trade and then a short trade when the cycle goes up and then when the cycle goes down. You must bear in mind you will not be taking both of those trading opportunities because of all the longer cycles that are causing the market to move with a general thrust upwards or downwards, you will not be taking all the trading opportunities, as we will discover in a moment. Okay, so if you want to be taking approximately a trade every 10 days, then possibly the 20-day cycle is a good cycle to trade.